Great.
Hi. All right, let's see, we're joined by 3 attendees already. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. We're just going to take a couple minutes to let everybody filter into the webinar before we get started. We're still doing some sound and system checks on our side as well. So it'll just be a few more minutes before we begin. All right, let's see, we're up to 11 people. I'll give it another minute or two and then we'll get started. So while we're waiting for everyone to filter in, it would be great if you could let us know a little bit about who you are so we know who's in the room. So if you can share with us your name, your role, where you are based, and what you're hoping to gain from this webinar via the chat, that will help us understand who's in the room, as well as all the attendees also know who is also participating today. And then I think we should go ahead and start. What do you guys think? Great, let's do it. All righty, so hi everyone, welcome to the Circularity Gap Report Denmark Data Explorer webinar. We're looking forward to sharing with you the results and impacts of our report today, as well as the new feature we've recently launched. Before we get started, like I said, we'd love to learn more about all of you who have joined. So again, if you could please use the chat to let us know who you are, entering this information that we have here on the slide. Again, this will help us get a better idea of who is joining us today. So go ahead and take your time to fill this in. While you're doing that, I will share some guidelines for today's session. So you'll notice that your cameras and microphones are unavailable during this webinar format. So if you have any questions throughout the session, please submit them via the chat. So you should be able to access the chat, I believe, either below in the bar or it might be above, depending on your setup. So we will make sure to answer your questions via the chat as you share them. You can also share any questions you have via our Q&A feature as well, if you prefer to do it that way. We'll make sure to answer those questions as we go on. Otherwise, we'll have a couple of QA breaks as well that we have planned into the agenda. So this session is interactive. There will be a few polls throughout today's webinar. Your feedback is super important for our work, so we look forward to your participation in these. And lastly, if you experience any technical issues, please let us know so that we can try to resolve them as quickly as possible. Again, you can let us know via the chat if you're experiencing any problems at all. So who are we? I am Lauren. I work at Circle Economy Foundation as digital product designer, and I've helped develop the data explorer that you will see later today. I am joined by my colleague Andrew, who is a researcher for the Circularity Gap Report Denmark, and then also Anders, who is the program lead of sustainable manufacturing at Industriens, which was one of the Circularity Gap project partners. And he will explain a little bit more later about their foundation. All right, so a little bit more information about us. So Circle Economy, what we do is we empower industries, cities, nations with practical and scalable solutions to put the circular economy into action, of course, with the goal to develop an economic system that ensures the planet and all people can thrive. What Industriens does is it promotes the competitiveness of Danish businesses with a focus specifically on sustainable production, cybersecurity, new technologies, and internationalization. So what we will be doing today is a few things. So Andrew will be starting off this webinar by walking us through some of the key insights from the report. And then Anders will share with us some of the report impact so far. Then we'll have a chance to address any questions that you have. Again, we'll go through the question and answers or the chat, and you're free to submit more questions at that point in time as well. After this, I will demo the Data Explorer feature, and then we'll end with another moment for any questions you might have. And as I said, there will also be some polls throughout for you to interact with, so keep your eye out for those too. All right, and let me double check before I hand over to you, Andrew, if there are any of the chat is not working for participants. Let me see if I can change that real quick.
Yes.
Let's see.
Otherwise, the Q&A.
Yeah, I think it should work now. So maybe somebody can let me know if that's the case. If somebody wants to go ahead and introduce themselves, as I suggested earlier, we can test it out. Let's see, attendees can chat with, let's see, everyone. Here we go. All right, first technical glitch, off to a good start. It wouldn't be a webinar without that, right? So it should be resolved, I believe. Maybe somebody can confirm for me, send a test message.
Yes.
Perfect. All right, great. Sorry about that, everyone. Okay, so now we can go ahead and get started. Feel free again to introduce yourselves via the chat. Andrew will go ahead and start his presentation. Again, feel free to also answer any questions you have during the through the chat or through the Q&A as well as this goes on. All right, off to you.
Yes, thank you, Lauren. And I hope you can all hear me clearly. If you could just go to the next slide after this also. Perfect. Well, before diving into the insights of the Denmark report, I first want to introduce the approach we take for circularity gaps in general. First, we take a macroeconomic perspective to investigate the material flows within the region. This allows us to see where the hotspots are and calculate the circularity indicators over the entire economy. This provides us with a good picture of the baseline situation. So after establishing this, we then explore different scenarios across key sectors and levers that aim to boost circularity and ultimately reduce environmental impacts. Because of course, circularity is not a goal in itself, but a means to an end. Finally, we put all of these insights together to form a coherent narrative alongside insights from local stakeholders to inspire action for change and take the report forward. So moving on to insights specifically from Denmark. What you can see here is a snapshot of the material flows that are moving into and through and out of the Danish economy. These represent the raw materials extracted throughout the entire value chains to ultimately serve the needs of Danish residents. Even at this macroeconomic level, a few key things stand out. Denmark is a highly material demanding economy. Looking at the societal needs bubble, so on the right-hand side, this represents the total material consumption of 148 million tons, translating to a per capita material consumption of around 25 tons. This is approximately twice that of the global average. Around 70% of that consumption comes from imports, showing a high import dependency. This is logical for such a small country. You can't see it in this simplified version of the diagram, but Denmark extracts relatively high levels of biomass and minerals, of which more than half, around 60%, are then subsequently exported out of the country. Finally, almost 1/3 of extracted materials feeding into meeting the country's societal needs are for long-lasting products, such as buildings, infrastructure, and other consumer goods that remain within the economy for longer than 1 year. We find this share to be higher in Denmark than in other economies. Now, I have highlighted two important elements. So on the right side, you see the societal needs that I just mentioned, otherwise known as the total material consumption. This is what's currently used to meet the needs of the economy for housing, transport, communication, food, etc. And highlighted on the left are the cycled materials. These are the materials that have been disposed of and subsequently cycled back into the economy. These two elements highlight the main components of our circularity metric, which is calculated from the total cycled materials over the total materials consumed by the economy. So basically, what percentage of materials consumed in the economy come from secondary sources. Therefore, a higher circularity metric relies on simultaneously increasing the amount of materials cycled back into the economy, as well as reducing the overall consumption of materials, with the latter being much more impactful given its much higher volume in this case. You may be thinking that this is still quite a limited view of circularity, which should also aim to keep products in circulation for as long as possible through reusing them more, for example. This is not included in the circularity metric because the data around this is very limited at a macroeconomic level, so it's very difficult to capture correctly. However, we're able to capture these kind of strategies in our scenario modeling because using products for longer essentially decreases the consumption of new products, and this is much easier to model. So this naturally leads me to the results of our analysis. And this is the first headline result, where we find Denmark to be 4% circular. This sits below the global average of 7.2, which we calculated in 2023, but it's somewhat comparable to its neighbors, Norway at 2.4% and Sweden at 3.4%, who we previously also published reports for. On the next slide, I will dive further into this number. So it's important to provide a bit more context to this single metric. If we look at the other 96%, we can also get a more nuanced understanding of how circular Denmark is. So the other elements consist of ecological cycling and non-renewable biomass. These make up almost 1/3 of consumed materials. These represent carbon neutral and non-carbon neutral inputs, respectively. Those that are carbon neutral are still not considered circular because in our metric, because we would actually need to be able to measure the nutrients being recycled back for these to be considered truly circular. However, we can say that they may have the potential to be. Next, non-renewable inputs. These refer to materials that have the potential to be recycled. Think of glass, plastic, metal cans. These have the potential but are currently being consumed as virgin materials. Next, non-circular inputs. This refers to fossil fuels used for energy purposes. These are inherently non-circular and we should aim to eliminate them. Finally, we have additions to reserves and stocks, which I already mentioned as being quite large in terms of the share in Denmark. So far, I've discussed the Danish economy in terms of materials. However, materials don't just flow through economies on their own. They are intertwined with the people and the types of businesses that operate within them. Therefore, we also conducted a jobs baseline analysis to see how much of the labor market is contributing to making Denmark more circular. The methodology does not consider circular jobs as something black and white, so circular versus non-circular, but instead it breaks it down into those that directly contribute to circularity, which we call core, those that enable the circular economy, for example, which we call enabling, for example, digital platforms, some digital platforms, and those that indirectly contribute through using circular inputs, for example, providing renewable energy to an office block. So we found that over 9.5% of jobs in the economy can be considered circular in one of these categories. The focus should be on increasing circularity within the sectors where there is a need for change. Think of construction companies, for example. They can be more focused on renovation projects or utilizing more secondary materials in their operations, whereas many jobs are much less relevant to becoming more circular. Think of doctors or some administrative workers, for example. These sectors are thus less relevant to this discussion. Now that we have a clear picture of the baseline metabolism, I will now talk about the scenarios we use to measure the potential impact of the circular economy across different value chains. These scenarios are counterfactual and are designed to provoke thinking about a possible future rather than a well-defined, feasible solution. So if we do these things, what is the result? Is basically what we do. So, well, given the limited time today and the amount we really want to share with you all, I will not dive into each of these, but instead introduce the fact that we explored 5 different scenarios, each with many different strategies, which aim to reduce the material footprints and boost circularity. We also measured the impact on greenhouse gas emissions that they can bring across the entire value chain. The scenarios explored for Denmark were a circular built environment, making more circular consumer and lifestyle choices, rethinking mobility and transport, creating a more circular food system, and finally, advancing circularity within the manufacturing sector. Each individual strategy modeled has a limited impact on the metric and the footprints. But when we combine everything, we see substantial impact. So what we find is that the material footprint could be lowered by 39%. The carbon footprint could be lowered by 42%. And the circularity metric could be almost doubled to 7.6%. This may seem like a humble increase, but what's most important to consider are the footprint reductions, since these are so tightly intertwined with environmental impacts. So our scenarios almost half their impacts, which is something really significant. So this is my final slide, and I just wanted to add one additional thing. Although some of the results, such as the 4% circular, may seem a little disheartening, what's great is that there are already so many initiatives happening in Denmark that are pushing the economy in a better direction. They just need to be scaled up and supported to form a new status quo. And I'm hopeful that this will happen in the coming years. So I want to thank everyone for listening, and I encourage you to scan the QR code or click on the link to download the full report to find out more. Feel free to pop any questions you have in the chat, and I will respond either in the chat or during our Q&A session. But for now, I would like to hand over to Anders.
Thank you, Andrew and Lauren, for this great introduction of the Circularity Gap Report, which has indeed been one of the most, I think, one of the most impactful projects within the last few years for the Danish Industry Foundation. I'll just give a brief introduction of the foundation. As the front page says, knowledge shapes the future. That means that we're in the business of shaping the future. So if you can go to the next slide, Lauren. So on an annual basis, we hand out approximately 250 million kroner. That's the equivalent somewhere between 30 and 40 million euros, and 5 billion kroner is our basic endowment, and we have 138 projects active. And we have a philanthropic foundation dedicated to Danish competitiveness, and we also think that circular economy is one of the key elements of that. So this is basically what we do in our projects. We work with knowledge, competencies, and innovations within 4 different areas. Can you move on? Entrepreneurship, cybersecurity, sustainable production, and internationalization. And yeah, if you can just move one slide ahead. So we're very focused on the circular agenda because it's a very important agenda for competitiveness. We have these consultancy reports showing a huge economic potential, and we can also at the same time see that circular economy is still a rather, how to put it, an area in which Danish companies are not very ahead of the game, which you can see on the figure to the left. So very low percentages of companies working extensively with circular economy. So move on. And in the Circularity Gap Alliance, we were together with these great partners, IDA, the Engineering Association of Denmark, the Confederation of Danish Industries, the Technological Institute of Denmark, DTU, Danish Design Center, and the Lifestyle and Design Cluster. And as I mentioned, we are a philanthropic foundation, so we basically hand out money to projects which are catalytic in nature, meaning that they build bridges between universities, civil society, authorities, and the business sector. So we never really give money directly to the companies. It's always in these consortia of different actors. So, and I also would like to show this small take of some of the impacts that the Circularity Gap Report kind of followed from the Circularity Gap Report. So we had this rather big splash in August where we got a lot of press about the report, especially the 4%, but also like the overall resource consumption of well, the per capita resource consumption of the Danish citizens, which was around 24.5%, which is rather big in an international context, as Andrew said. We did the launch of the report at the Parliament in Denmark, and you can see in the left bottom corner some of these wooden boxes in front of the Parliament, where we had this green box saying 4%. As Andrew pointed out before, and we had the Minister of Environment who was given the report at this launch. And basically what has happened from this launch is that a lot of actually national strategies, or not really national strategies, but at least national initiatives always kind of refer to the Circularity Gap Report as sort of the baseline for all these new initiatives. And for ourselves as a foundation, this is definitely also a call for action, and basically a foundation on which we want to launch new projects, kind of fostering or enhancing circularity within the Danish business sector. So, moving to the last slide. The topic of today is, as Lauren and Andrew started out with, the Data Explorer, and we're very happy about this this side project within the broader Circularity Gap Denmark project, because like obviously data is key to driving the circular agenda forward. We need more detailed data about the material footprints, and we hope that this Data Explorer can kind of give both academia and civil society and authorities and companies themselves a better basis to do some more action within this area. And I think that's basically my words for now.
All right, thank you. Yeah, thank you both, Andrew and Anders. We'll now take a short pause before moving on to the demo of the Data Explorer to address any questions that you have. I do see a couple of questions have been answered in the chat already, and one is being answered right now. If anybody has any questions for Andrew or Anders, please feel free to add more submissions into the chat at this point in time. Otherwise, I'll go through some of the questions that have been answered already. So one of the questions we had earlier was, what year does the data represent? So the data in the Circularity Gap Report for Denmark is from 2019. This is the data that we had available, and where it wasn't available, it was extrapolated to represent 2019, was Andrew's response. We now have a question, why is the net addition to the stock so high for Denmark, which Andrew is answering in the chat, I believe. Otherwise, you're also free to just go ahead and answer that verbally if you'd like.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I was typing, but it makes sense just to verbally. Well, I think, yeah, very interesting question. And it's something that is quite difficult to answer, in fact. But I think it's likely due to high levels of infrastructure and building development relative to other materials being consumed. So not saying that it's this like massively high in an absolute sense, but relative to other things. It's probably due to that. Also, another explanation are that the materials it's consuming are those of a more long-lasting nature, so less single-use kind of things, but more things that stay for longer than 1 year in the economy.
All right, I hope that was a sufficient response. Does anybody have anything else that they would like to ask us before we move on to the demonstration? I'll wait just a couple of seconds to see if anything in the chat comes through. Otherwise, Anders or Andrew, do you guys have any final points or anything more you want to share before we go into the demo?
Well, I would actually like to thank Circular Economy for a great job of designing this data explorer and also the project that it builds upon. So yeah, that was just my final comment.
Thanks. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. So what I'll do now is I will move on to the demo. If you have any questions, while I move forward, again, feel free to keep adding them into the chat or the Q&A, and we'll answer them as we go. Before we get started, I actually have a quick poll for you all. So I'm curious to know how many of you have already tried our Data Explorer. So I'm going to, let's see, launch this now. Again, this is a new feature we're trying, so let's see how it works. I believe you should all now have a poll appear, perhaps in the menu or on your screen, where you're able to answer the question whether or not you have already used the Data Explorer. Are you guys able to see the results as well, or is that just on my side?
We can see the results. Well,
awesome.
I can.
As a panelist, at least, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Cool. All right, so it seems like most people haven't. So a few of you have, which is great. So let me introduce what it is. Let's see. Let me end this poll real quick. All right, so yeah, so just a quick intro about what this new feature is. So for the first time, we've launched a digital supplement to the Circularity Gap Report called the Data Explorer. Now, what it is a way to deep dive into the data that our analysts use as part of the project. And it allows you to further explore in an interactive way some of the key indicators that we report on. So here you see a list, which I'll go into detail more fully, actually show you the Explorer. So let me go ahead and quickly switch my screens so that I can showcase the tool. Let's see. All right. I believe now everyone should be able to see the Data Explorer. Perhaps one of the panelists can confirm if that's the case for me.
Yes. Yep.
Perfect.
Seems good.
All right, great. So awesome. So just some starting information is that this Data Explorer is openly accessible to everyone. So it's linked on the Circularity Gap Report Denmark webpage on our Circularity Gap Reporting Initiative website. And I believe you can also find it through the LinkedIn event that we shared with you, and I'll also send it to you as a follow-up to this webinar. So here on the left, you'll see all the different data sets that we have available, starting with circularity indicators, which are those headline indicators that Andrew talked about in his presentation. We have information on domestic extraction, material footprint, carbon footprint, waste management, and circular jobs. So, but then, of course, we have an introduction page as well, because we know that this tool is new and we have a lot of different interactions that you can explore. So we want to make sure you understand exactly how they work. So we've actually included an instructional video that you can reference in case you want to know how to interact with the data and visualizations. We also have some information on the methodology that is listed here. And if you seek further information, there's a link down here to the methodology document that goes into further detail about our reporting. And because this feature is new, we would love to have your feedback. So throughout this feature, you'll find buttons that say provide feedback. I think I have one on every single page, and it will take you to a survey that will allow me to learn your thoughts. So let's get started with the first page, the circularity indicators. Here you can see those headline indicators, like I said, that Andrew discussed earlier. So the 4% socioeconomic cycling rates, and of course, then here, the 96% gap. So below you can see what makes up the gap, here that breakdown across additions to stock, ecological cycling potential, the non-circular materials, non-renewable, and then non-renewable biomass. And below we also have definitions for what those mean. Furthermore, we have data on domestic extraction. So what's interesting here is not only do we have the totals and the per capita of these data points, is we also show the materials specifically that are extracted within the Danish economy. So this is within, let's say, Danish boundaries. So what's nice about this is most of the time in this Explorer, if there are two things side by side, they interact with one another. So in this case, for example, here where I see that I see the material group breakdown, I can actually use that as a means to filter the list on the left. So if, for example, I only want to focus on biomass, I can click here and it'll filter that list to show all the materials extracted that belong to the group biomass. I can click the other one and it'll load in that data, and I can deselect as well this way. So this list goes on, so you can also scroll to continue to see all the materials, and of course they're in a decreasing amount. We also have data on the exports of domestically extracted material. So of course materials can be consumed domestically, or they can be exported in the form of raw materials to other countries. And this shows where the extracted materials are finally consumed. So for example, here you can see the proportion across these different country groups, as well as the breakdown of materials. Now, if we click this, for example, and we want to know more about Asia and the Pacific, we can actually drill down and get a list of the countries as well. So the destination countries that the material goes through, including the breakdown here. And to reset any of the graphs, after you've done some kind of interaction, an arrow will show up here on the left for you to reset and be able to perform a new operation. Next, we have the material footprint. So for material footprint, in our report, we actually focus on a consumption-based approach. Here in this Data Explorer, we've shown data for both a consumption-based approach as well as a production-based approach. So you can learn more about that here. We have some sources that will link to more information about exactly what we mean by that. And here at the top line, you can see we again have the per capita totals listed for each of those, which if you click on optional metrics, you can also change to see the total or absolute value instead of the per capita values. And that's a general note about this Explorer in general is try to interact with everything, click on all the graphs. Anywhere you see a button, there's probably something you can do with it to get more or different kinds of data to appear. Same here, for example, you can see that you can break down the material group based on the consumption-based approach or the per capita-based approach, or with information on imports or exports. Now, what we also have is the imported material footprint. So what this chart shows is the countries in which a raw material is extracted before being exported to the country of consumption. So for example, iron ore could be extracted from China, but then imported into Denmark to produce steel products. The country of origin would of course still be China. So here, similar to the graph I showed before, you can click on any of these to drill down specifically to get a list of nations. So if I again want to see Asia and the Pacific, you'll first of all see the list on the right update to see the data that corresponds with that country group. So here we see the sector groups, manufacturing, construction, etc. So now it's showing you that data specifically for Asia and the Pacific. Here we can drill down. You'll see nothing changes here, but imagine that now I want to know specifically what the information is for China. I can click there and it'll update the graph on the left, on the right. And what's even more is that I can also click on one of the sectors here and drill down there, or one of the sector groups, and it'll break it down into the specific sectors. So you'll get even more of a detailed list of what's included in these data points. And again, you can do that with any of these. You can also break it down here already, so you don't have to select a region. You can just look at the total amount of material in the manufacturing industry and then drill down and see those figures here. Lastly, for material footprint, what we have is a country comparison. So we've already gone ahead and filtered it for European nations. You can see Denmark is listed here, and we've included the global sustainable material footprint target for where nations ideally should aim to be at. And here, similarly to the graphs above, you can switch between a consumption-based approach as well as a production-based approach. And of course, you can reset if you need to. We have information about the carbon footprint. This works very similarly to the chart I showed you before as well. So here we have a list of nations, which you can drill down to, here you can see the list of country groups where you can drill down into the particular nations. And same here from sector group down into specific sectors. We have information on waste management as well. So what we show is the total amount of waste that is treated. We have the recycling rate up here, as well as a breakdown of waste treatment type. And then here on the left, the list of material groups that the waste belongs to. So again, similar to all the other charts, I can drill down and get more of a specific list of what materials we exactly mean. I can click on the right to see only materials that are recycled. I could see materials that are sent for energy recovery and so on. So there's a lot of different combinations of data that you can gather through these different interactions. And lastly, we have information on circular jobs. If you want more information about what exactly we mean by circular jobs, we have our methodology listed up here at the top. What we use to define different sectors is the NACE codes. So you'll find those that are listed here. Again, if you want to find out more information about a particular industry, you can click it. Sorry, my computer froze for a second. You can click it and drill down and get a specific list of jobs within that sector. And you'll see the total numbers update for whatever sector you have chosen here on the right as well. Then we have some information for how circular jobs have trended over time. And here there's some optional metrics you can choose as well, or you can drill down to see it per NACE code as well. So that is what we have in our Explorer. Obviously, I just went through a lot quite quickly, and I think a little bit over half of you haven't tried this tool yet. So at this point, I would encourage you to try it out, to try to, to see what kind of information you can get from it, to also let us know what interactions you would want through the feedback form that I suggested. As I said, you can access that here or at the bottom of any of the following pages. So we'll have a Q&A session now to close this off. You can let Andrew or I and Anders know if you have any questions about the rest of the presentation or this feature. Before we do that, however, I have another poll that I would like to share with you guys to get your initial thoughts on the feature that I just showed you. So let me initiate that. All right. So now I believe everybody should see poll number 2, in which we have 4 questions. The first of which is whether or not you see this as a valuable resource. The second is to let us know what you would want to use the Data Explorer for. We're curious what data from the report or the Data Explorer are most interesting to you. And lastly, whether or not you feel that there is any data missing from the report and or Data Explorer. So in this case, I think it's fine to answer, as I said, both, or for the last 2 questions anyway, to answer both for the report and the Data Explorer, because of course they go hand in hand, right? Like the data we have is what we use to construct the report. So we can use your input to improve any of the, both of the outputs, let's say. All right, so I will give you a couple minutes to answer those questions while I pull up my slides again. And then at the end, we will go back into the Q&A. Go share. And also in the meantime, if you've already finished answering the questions in the poll, feel free to use the chat to share any further questions you have with us, or in the Q&A, so that we can have a list of things to discuss at the end of the poll.
I see a question in the chat, Lauren.
Okay, let's see. All right, so the question we have in the chat is whether the Data Explorer is only for countries that have done their Circularity Gap Report, or Denmark only, or will it be, is it a guide for countries looking to develop their CGRs? So right now, our first launch was with Denmark. So that's the data, of course, that you see now in this Data Explorer. However, it is something that we are interested in doing for upcoming reports, and that's something that we're trying to gauge now with this session, is what the relative level of interest is in a feature like this, so that we can make that decision actually about whether or not to move forward with it, which we would really like to do. But of course, that's dependent on the value that you all see it having. So it's definitely something we can apply to other nations. Again, the data that we use for the report is part of our standard methodology. So in terms of constructing a dashboard like this, it's definitely feasible to do for other nations as well. I don't know if maybe you have a follow-up to that, Andrew.
No, I think that's complete. I agree.
Right. All right, then our next question, any plans on updating with more years and deltas to explore development? So that's a really great question. We have, at this point, done primarily, let's say, single circular gap reports. So one instance for a nation, and of course, we do our global report over time. It would definitely be interesting to also be able to use a tool like this to see changes in the metrics. That's something we're definitely open to doing and exploring also as part of our future research and prototyping and whatnot. So we don't have plans yet, but it definitely is something that we have in our, let's say, backlog for something that we might want to explore in the future, definitely.
Yep, and just to add that it might make sense to update it every 2 years, for example, so that there really are, you can notice trends a little bit better. So it would be super interesting.
All right, do we have any other questions? You're also welcome to just use the chat. I don't think I can share the results of this poll. I do see people have filled it out. Really happy to see that most of you see the Data Explorer as a valuable tool so far. I can unfortunately not read the answers yet for what you guys said that you would like to use the Data Explorer for, so I can't address that right now in the discussion either, however much I would like to. If there's anything that you have submitted, by the way, through this poll that I want to follow up on, I might do so. So of course, we're curious to develop this out further. So I think having a dialogue with all of you as participants would be really great to keep the development on this going. I'll share more about the next steps after this webinar once we're finished with this Q&A.
I see another question that I think I can take.
Sure.
So Meta asks, where is the data for waste management coming from? I'm quite sure it comes from the Statistics Office of Denmark. However, I was not the data analyst, so I advise you to check the methodology document where we really break down the data source of everything in our analysis. So that will be able to tell you, yeah, which categories we considered and how.
All right. Any last questions? Feel free to, you can ask about anything about tool functionality, about the report. Any more questions for Anders as well are welcome. I'll give it a couple more seconds, and if we don't see anything appear in the meantime, then I'll move into our closing and our next steps. All righty. Great. So thank you all for joining us today. And especially thanks for all your input and your questions. We hope that you found this webinar informative. After this session, we will follow up with a message either via LinkedIn or email to each of you with a link to the Data Explorer so that you can test it further in your own time. We will also include a short survey in this message asking you what you thought about this webinar. This is the first time that we're doing something like this, so feedback is greatly appreciated so that we can figure out how to make it even more engaging or interesting for you in the future. And lastly, I will also be organizing a follow-up workshop on the Data Explorer to continue developing this feature. So for example, that question that was asked about whether we might use this to show a change in data or trends over time is something that would be perfectly fit to talk about or explore during that session. So in this workshop, it'll actually be more of an interactive setting for us where you can share your input and we can discuss extended ideas together. So keep an eye on your LinkedIn or your email for this invitation as well. If you have any further questions for us or thoughts you'd like to share after this session, please feel free to reach out to us. And other than that, thank you for joining. I wish you all a wonderful afternoon and a great rest of the week. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well,
and thank you to my panelists for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, everyone.